Hello, good morning and a very warm welcome to you. I'm Rachel. You're watching Kalkine TV live from Sydney. This is the Global Markets Roundup show. Let us glance now at how the global markets are looking, starting with the US market. Global shares rose on Friday, hitting an all-time high on a lift from a better-than-expected US monthly jobs report. This signalled a strong end to the second quarter in the world's largest economy. The MSCI All-Country World Index closed at 725.41. That's up 0.39% on the day. The Pan-European Stoxx 600 index settled 0.26% higher, and on Wall Street the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq hit record highs. Wall Street scaled new highs on Friday, with the S&P closing up for a seventh straight day. That's after the jobs data for June showed robust hiring, yet persistent weakness in the labour market that'll keep the Federal Reserve from raising interest rates anytime soon. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 152.82 points, or 0.44%. The S&P 500 gained 32.4 points, or 0.75%, and the Nasdaq Composite added 116.95 points, or 0.81%. Moving on to some news now. The latest labour data showed that the US economy had added 850,000 jobs in June. That's the highest job openings since August 2020. However, the unemployment rate marginally rose to 5.9% from 5.8% in May. That's partially due to the increased number of job seekers, a separate survey shows. The June jobs data should offer some respite to the Federal Reserve, whose major attention has been on employment, one of its primary considerations for keeping the interest rates down despite inflation. In their recent meeting, most Fed officials had favoured maintaining the current policy. In corporate news now, Virgin Galactic stock closed around 4% higher. That's after the space flight company announced that its billionaire founder, Sir Richard Branson, along with others, will travel into space on the 11th of July. That's ahead of Jeff Bezos. Jeff is planning a similar trip on his Blue Origin spaceship on July the 20th. Virgin Galactic holding stock jumped more than 28% in the pre-market session on Friday. Meanwhile, electric vehicle maker Tesla reported a record delivery of vehicles, mainly the cheaper models, in the second quarter, despite a chip shortage. This is in line with analysts' estimates. Tesla delivered 201,250 vehicles in the second quarter, whereas analysts estimated 200,258 vehicles. That's according to Refinitiv data. Its stock was trading flat in Friday's session. Moving on, AMC Entertainment Holding shares fell around 12% in the morning session. That's after the short seller Iceberg Research tweeted it sold AMC shares in the short term on a bearish bet. However, the stock later recovered some grounds to close at 4.17%, down at the market close. In tech stocks, Apple gained 1.74%, Microsoft rose 2.28%, and then Nvidia Corp increased by 1%. ASML Holdings, MV, advanced 1.41%, Adobe advanced 1.38%, and Intel Corp advanced 1.38%. In industrial and energy stocks, United Parcel Service rose 0.75%, Union Pacific Corp increased by 0.57%, while the Boeing Company declined 1.04%. Shares of PetroChina Company fell 1.74%, and Enbridge gained 0.69%. China Petroleum and Chemical Corp ticked down at 1.79%, and Equinor advanced 0.99%. Over to the financial sector now. Berkshire Hathaway shares plummeted 0.42%. The Bank of America Corp shed 0.84%. Wells Fargo and Company fell 0.76%. Conversely, Visa increased by 1.32%, and MasterCard increased by 0.98%. Shares of DD Global Inc. fell 7.44%. Now, that was after China's Cyberspace Administration said it launched a probe to determine whether the company poses a national security risk. It comes 2 days after the company made a stock market debut in the US, and they were laggards. Moving to the futures and commodities now. Gold futures are up 0.61%. Silver increased 2.01%, while copper rose 1.02%. Brent oil rose 0.29%, and WTI crude increased 2.25%. Looking at the bond market now, US Treasury yields were lower on Friday. That's after a strong payroll report left uncertainty about how the Federal Reserve might respond. The 30-year Treasury bond yields was down 1.96%, while the 10-year bond yields decreased 3.34%. Taking a look at the US dollar future index now, the dollar dropped from a 3-month high earlier on Friday, weighed down by what analysts views as a mixed US non-farm payrolls report for June. That showed a strong headline number, but with some weak components. US dollar futures index fell 0.37%. Gold rose on Friday, climbing further from a 2-month trough hit earlier in the week. That's as the dollar weakened and investors weighed prospects for US Federal Reserve tightening after a strong US jobs report that nevertheless showed a slight uptick in the unemployment rate. This is how the US market fared on Friday. It's time now for a very short break, after which we'll look at Europe and the Asian stock markets. Stay tuned.
Crypto talk by Kalkine. The crypto market has been red hot given the Bitcoin rally since the past year. And now the most famous cryptocurrency has got competitors, Dogecoin and Ethereum. If the crypto market excites you, tune in with me, Sage, to know the latest developments about the existing digital currencies and the new ones that are joining the race. I'll help you understand the opportunities and the risks the crypto market has in store for you. For all the digital currency related developments, continue watching Crypto Talk by Kalkine.
Welcome back. I'm Rachel and you're watching Kalkine TV live from Sydney. This is the Global Markets Roundup show. Let us now take a look at the European and Asian stock markets. European shares ended slightly higher on Friday on a boost from chip makers, although gains were capped by weak bank stocks and growing concerns over the Delta variant of the coronavirus. The Pan-European Stock 600 index rose 0.3% to close with energy stocks rising 1.1%. Moving on to Tokyo now, Japan's Nikkei share average closed higher on Friday. That's as gains in export-focused Sony Group and Toyota Motor on a weakened yen offset weakness in chip-related stocks. But the index ended lower for the week on concerns over those fresh coronavirus cases. The Nikkei rose 0.27% to close after 4 straight sessions of declines, while the broader Topix jumped 0.88%. Next, let's take a look at the Shanghai markets. China's blue chip index closed nearly 3% lower to mark its worst day in almost 4 months. That's as investors dumped shares across the board on growth concerns. That's a day after China's Communist Party celebrated its centenary. The blue chip CSI 300 index fell 2.8%, while the Shanghai Composite Index lost 2%. Both the indices had their biggest one-day percentage drop since early March. Lastly, let's glance at the Seoul market. South Korea shares ended flat on Friday while posting their first weekly decline in 7 weeks. That's as concerns about a rapid resurgence in COVID-19 cases offset upbeat US data. The Kospi closed 0.28 points or 0.01% lower following a 0.44% decline on Thursday. That's how the European and Asian markets fared on Friday. It's time for a short break now. After the break, we'll take a look at the Australian stock market. Stay tuned.
Tune in to stay updated while on the move.
We will tell you where the crypto craze has reached,
Where the property market is headed next.
what the world is doing to become more environmentally friendly.
Apart from tracking the daily market charter.
Be on top of the latest news and announcements
With Kalkine TV.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Rachel. You're watching Kalkine TV live from Sydney. This is the Global Markets Roundup show. Let us now take a look at the Australian stock market. On Monday, the ASX 200 opened higher this morning, despite the country continuing to battle an outbreak of the highly contagious Delta variant of the coronavirus. Strong oil and copper prices will likely help miners and energy stocks gain in today's session. The Australian and New Zealand dollars traded sharply higher on Friday. The Aussie dollar was up 0.78% to 75.25 US cents. That's despite the re-emergence of coronavirus lockdowns in Australia, hurting sentiments as a trio of local data underline the upbeat economic outlook at home. On Friday, the technology sector in the US supported the markets towards their all-time high level. Today, Australian technology shares such as Xero, BrainChip Holdings and Afterpay could trade higher for the day. Australian energy shares such as Santos, Woodside Petroleum and Origin Energy would be on investors' radars today. Australian gold miners such as St Barbara, De Grey Mining and Newcrest Mining could trade slightly higher for the day. And local miners such as BHP, Rio Tinto and the Fortescue Metals Group could support the market today. Okay, that's all for now. Stay tuned with Kalkine TV for more live market updates. We'll be back with more news on the markets, the economy and diverse themes and sectors. I'm Rachel, signing off for now.